Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the chapter that really gets to the core of what brings an organization's plans to life. I want you to think of a business like a giant, complex machine. You can have the absolute best blueprint, the finest materials, a perfect structural design, but without a spark plug, that engine is simply not going to run. Well, in the realm of management, that active spark plug is what we call directing. So let's jump right in and explore how directing actually transforms static plans into real dynamic action. To really grasp the stakes here, let's look at this amazing quote directly from the source material regarding the Ford Motor Company. Ford realized that having capable managers and technicians wasn't enough. They needed a total cultural overhaul. They needed to mass manufacture leaders. They literally set out to build an army of what they called warrior entrepreneurs. And that specific phrase, warrior entrepreneurs, is just so telling. It shows that a massive global corporation recognizes that true success doesn't come from just barking orders from the top down. It comes from directing at the grassroots level, empowering the people who actually believe in change passionately enough to make it happen. So, what does directing actually mean in a formal management context? Well, it's the process of instructing, guiding, counseling, motivating, and leading people in the organization to achieve its objectives. As the text highlights, whether it's a hotel owner organizing a huge event, a teacher working with a student, or a film director on set, directing is always done to achieve a very specific, predetermined objective. It's not a one-off task. It's an ongoing, continuous process that happens at literally every level of management where there's a superior and a subordinate. Directing is a pretty vast function, but we can break it down into four distinct, interrelated pillars: supervision, motivation, leadership, and communication. All right, let's look at element number one, supervision, which is all about overseeing the work. Supervision is really the foundational act of keeping day-to-day operations on track. The text points out that we can understand this term in two ways. First, as an overarching element of directing, and second, as a specific function performed by supervisors in the hierarchy. But ultimately, supervision is about overseeing the work directly at the operative level. It's guiding workers and making absolutely sure that daily targets are met exactly as planned. Moving on to element number two, motivation, where we shift from overseeing the work to driving the human element. Now, before we can motivate anyone, we kind of need to get our terminology straight. The chapter outlines three distinct M's. First up is the motive. This is an inner state that energizes or activates behavior toward a goal. It comes from our own internal needs, creating a sort of restlessness that pushes us to act. Second is motivation itself. This is the complex process of actually stimulating people to action. And it's complex because, well, people are complicated. We all have different expectations. Finally, we have the motivator, which is the specific technique a manager uses, like pay, a bonus, a promotion, or even just some well-timed praise. To really understand the psychology behind workplace motivation, we have to look at Abraham Maslow's need hierarchy theory. This is from a classic paper published way back in 1943. Maslow proposed that inside every single human being, there's a hierarchy of 5 needs, and a manager absolutely has to understand where an employee sits on this pyramid to figure out the right way to motivate them. Let's walk up this psychological climb together. It starts right at the bottom with basic physiological needs. We're talking hunger, thirst, shelter. Once those are met, we move up to safety and security needs, which is all about protection from physical and emotional harm. Then comes affiliation or belonging needs, that human desire for affection, acceptance, and friendship. Fourth are esteem needs, dealing with self-respect, status, and recognition. And finally, at the very peak is self-actualization, the drive to become everything you are fully capable of becoming. So how does this translate into the real world of management? Well, Maslow's general human needs map perfectly onto tangible workplace realities. How do you satisfy that basic need of hunger? With a basic salary. Need stability of income? That's your pension plan. The need for friendship translates to cordial relations with your colleagues. That individual desire for status? That's met with a specific job title. And that peak need for self-fulfillment is realized when an employee achieves major, meaningful goals at work. Knowing these needs, managers use different incentives to boost performance. And these fall into 2 buckets, financial and non-financial. Financial incentives use the purchasing power of money to satisfy those physical needs. Salary, bonuses, profit sharing, you get the idea. But non-financial incentives are honestly just as crucial because they hit those psychological and social needs. We're talking job security, recognizing someone's worth, and employee participation. Actually involving your team in the decisions that affect them creates a massive sense of ownership.
That brings us to element number 3, leadership, which is the art of influencing willingly.
Remember the Ford warrior entrepreneurs concept? This is where it comes into play. Leadership is defined as the continuous process of influencing people to strive willingly for group objectives. The key word there is willingly. It's not about standing far away and dictating orders. It's about getting in there, leading by example, sharing a vision, and really fostering cooperation. But here is a super fascinating dynamic from the text. So often, the success of an organization is credited entirely to the leader, and the followers just don't get their due. But the reality is that followers actually make a person a good leader by accepting that leadership. A leader's effectiveness relies heavily on the skills, knowledge, and commitment of their team. It's very much a two-way street. And finally, we hit element number 4, communication. This is the fragile loop that holds everything else together. The word communication actually comes from the Latin word communis, meaning common. So the whole point of communication is creating a common understanding. It's the exchange of ideas, views, and feelings. And get this, it's estimated that a manager spends up to 90% of their time communicating, reading, writing, listening, guiding. It is a massive part of the job.
But to understand just how tricky that 90% of a manager's time can be, we need to look at the formal communication process. Information doesn't just instantly teleport from one mind to another. It has to travel through a systematic, multi-step loop.
Let's break down this delicate little journey. First, you have the sender, the source of the idea. Then comes encoding, which is converting that idea into symbols like words or gestures. Next, it travels through media, the channel, maybe a face-to-face chat or an email. Then the receiver has to do the decoding, converting those symbols back into meaning. And finally, feedback completes the loop, letting the sender know the message was actually understood. But of course, there is an invisible enemy here. The source material calls it noise. Noise is basically any obstruction that distorts the communication process. It can happen at the sender, during the transmission, or at the receiver, and it's constantly threatening to derail even the best management plans. So what does this noise actually look like? Well, it could be ambiguous words that lead to faulty encoding. It could literally be a terrible phone connection. Maybe it's an inattentive receiver, or faulty decoding, where someone just completely misinterprets the message. It can even be personal prejudices that block true understanding. Just one of these things can instantly turn a brilliant, clear directive into total chaos. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to wrap up today. We've seen that directing is the engine of an organization, and it relies on supervision, motivation, leadership, and communication to run. But engines only run smoothly when they're perfectly tuned. So think about it. Is your organization successfully managing all 4 elements, empowering those grassroots warrior entrepreneurs, or is systemic noise just getting in the way? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep exploring these concepts to fine-tune your own organizational engine.